28,000 years ago, in what is now Ukraine, a group of humans didn't build their home on the ground. They dug into it. They cut a pit deep into the frozen earth, deep enough to stand in, deep enough to disappear into. And then they roofed it over with the skulls and tusks of mammoths. From above, at night, it would have looked like nothing. No fire glow, no silhouette, just flat, dead, frozen ground. But underneath it, a family was alive, breathing, waiting out a wind that could kill an exposed human in under 20 minutes. They had turned the earth itself into a weapon against the cold. And that wasn't even the strangest thing they did to survive. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how humans made it through the harshest climate our species has ever faced, method by method, choice by choice. And you'll understand why almost none of it looked like survival the way we imagine it. It looked like something closer to war. Let's be precise about what we're dealing with. Not cold, not a hard winter. We're talking about a version of Earth where ice sheets nearly 2 miles thick buried entire continents. Northern Europe, most of Canada, vast stretches of Asia, gone under permanent ice. Average temperatures set 15 to 20 degrees Celsius below what we live in today. For months at a time, in the far north, the sun barely rose above the horizon. Wind chill alone could pull heat out of the human body faster than any modern survival manual accounts for. Most large animals in this environment did the statistically sensible thing. They went extinct. Woolly rhinos, cave bears, entire branches of megafauna, erased. But a slow, clawless, furless, weak-jawed primate, a species that, in any fair fight, loses to almost everything around it, didn't just survive this world, it spread across it. Not because of strength, because of a set of survival methods so specific, so calculated, and in some cases so unsettling, that they still surprise archaeologists today. Let's go through them, one by one, because each one gets stranger than the last. The first method is the one you'd expect, but almost nobody understands how fragile it actually was. Fire wasn't a convenience. It was the only thing standing between a human body and hypothermia in under an hour. And in the depths of the Ice Age, fire was not easy to create on demand. Friction methods took skill, dry material, and time. 3 things you don't reliably have in a blizzard. So early humans didn't keep making fire. They kept fire alive. Entire social roles existed around one job. Don't let the flame go out. Coals were carried, banked in ash, transported between camps, guarded through the night in rotating shifts. In some archaeological sites, hearths show signs of continuous use spanning generations. The same fire, in the same pit, kept burning for years, passed down like an inheritance. Losing the fire wasn't inconvenient. It could be a death sentence for the entire group. And that single fact reshaped how these humans organized themselves, because it meant survival depended on trust, on someone else staying awake while you slept, on a stranger, decades before you were born, never letting the coals go cold. But fire alone wasn't enough, because fire couldn't fight the wind. For that, they needed something far stranger. This is the part almost nobody talks about. Across sites in Eastern Europe and Siberia, archaeologists have found something that doesn't match our image of cavemen at all. Deliberately dug, semi-underground dwellings. Pits carved directly into the earth, sometimes over a meter deep, with walls reinforced by bone, hide, and packed sod, and a roof built low across the top. Why dig down instead of building up? Because soil is an insulator. A few feet underground, the temperature barely fluctuates. It stays warmer than the surface air, no matter how violent the storm above. By sinking their living space into the ground, Ice Age humans were engineering a passive heating system tens of thousands of years before anyone had a word for thermal insulation. These weren't caves. Most of the open tundra had no caves to hide in. So they made their own, cutting straight into frozen ground with stone and bone tools, hauling out earth by hand, in temperatures that could kill a person doing exactly that kind of exposed labor. Think about that combination for a second. To build the shelter that would keep you alive, you first had to survive the cold without it. And once the pit was dug, the entrance itself became a design problem. Too open, and wind poured straight down into the living space. So many of these dwellings were built with narrow, angled entry tunnels, early airlocks, forcing incoming wind to lose momentum before it ever reached the people inside. This wasn't primitive. This was structural engineering under existential pressure. But then something even stranger happened. Because in some regions there wasn't enough wood, and there weren't enough caves, and even the ground was frozen too solid to dig easily. So they built with the only large structural material still available: the dead. At a site called Mezerich in what is now Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered something that still unsettles people who study it. A dwelling built from the bones of over 100 mammoths. Skulls stacked in careful, load-bearing rings to form the base of the walls. Long bones interlocked like structural beams. Tusks curved upward and layered to form the roof. This wasn't a pile of bones. It was architecture, deliberately engineered, requiring planning, transport, and construction knowledge passed between people who understood exactly how weight and pressure worked. Here's the question that should be bothering you. Where do you get the remains of over 100 mammoths? There are two competing answers, and both of them are unsettling in different ways. Some researchers argue these groups were skilled, coordinated hunters, capable of bringing down an animal that could crush them in a single step, using terrain, group tactics, and pit traps to turn size into a disadvantage. Others argue they scavenged mammoth graveyards, natural die-off sites where the animals had died from other causes over years, and simply collected the remains. Either answer means the same disturbing thing. These humans learned to look at massive, violent death, over and over, on a scale most of us will never witness. Not with horror, but with architecture in mind. You already know they wore fur. But here's what most documentaries skip entirely. Loose fur draped over the body does very little against Ice Age wind. What actually kept people alive was tailored, layered, sewn clothing, and the evidence for it is almost eerie in its precision. At a burial site called Sungir in Russia, archaeologists found bodies buried roughly 34,000 years ago, covered in thousands of small ivory beads, arranged in patterns that mirror fitted clothing, jackets, trousers, even footwear, each stitched closely enough to trap a layer of warm air against the skin. This is the same principle modern Arctic gear is built on. They discovered it with bone needles and animal sinew. The needle itself is the detail people miss. A needle with an eye, a hole small enough to thread sinew through, required stone tools precise enough to drill a hole a fraction of a millimeter wide, in bone, by hand, in the cold, without modern lighting. That's not a caveman detail. That's precision manufacturing. And this technology had a cost that never makes it into the highlight reel. Every piece of usable hide came from an animal that had to be hunted, killed, skinned, scraped, and cured. A process that could take days per garment, in temperatures where your hands could go numb in minutes. Clothing wasn't something you owned. It was something you survived long enough to finish making. Here's a method so simple, it's almost invisible. And it might be one of the most important on this list. The ground itself was a freezer. Ice Age humans learned to dig storage pits into permafrost, packing them with meat from a successful hunt. In sub-zero ground, that meat could stay preserved for months, sometimes longer, turning a single kill from a few days of food into a season's worth of insurance against starvation. This changes the entire picture of how these people lived. It means survival wasn't just about the moment of the hunt. It was about time-shifting resources, taking a windfall today and stretching it across a future you couldn't predict. Bad weather, failed hunts, injury, sickness, all of it became survivable because months earlier, someone had the discipline to bury food instead of eating it. That's not just physical survival. That's forward thinking, delayed gratification, risk management. Psychological tools we usually associate with modern life, encoded into a hole dug in frozen ground 20,000 years before agriculture existed. Look at everything on this list again. The fire someone had to guard so it never went out. The pit dug into frozen ground before the shelter existed to protect the digger. The mammoth skeletons turned into architecture. The clothing stitched with bone needles, thread by thread in the cold. The food buried for a future self who might be desperate. The hunts planned and executed by people who had to trust each other completely. None of these are stories about strength. They're stories about coordination, patience, foresight, and trust, under conditions where a single mistake meant death, not embarrassment. This isn't really a story about the Ice Age. It's a story about what's still sitting underneath your own instincts. The part of you that plans ahead, that saves something for later, that trusts people you depend on, even when trust is dangerous, that builds shelter, literal or otherwise, before the storm arrives, not after. You inherited that machinery from people who didn't get the option to skip it. They didn't survive the Ice Age because they were tougher than the world around them. They survived because they outthought it. One buried cache, one dug pit, one guarded flame at a time. We like to picture early humans as simple, primitive, barely holding on. But maybe holding on was never simple at all. Maybe it took more precision, more cooperation, and more quiet, disciplined courage than anything we're asked to do today, just to make it to the next morning in a world actively trying to kill you. The Ice Age ended 12,000 years ago, but the questions it asked, can you plan for a future you can't see? Can you trust someone with your life? Can you build shelter before you need it? Never really stopped being asked. They're just quieter now, comfortable enough that most of us forgot we're still answering them.